As you prepare to journey into the silent, crystalline heart of the abyss, let your breathing slow until it matches the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of the deep-sea currents. Imagine the heavy, protective weight of the Atlantic pressing against the reinforced quartz walls of your mind, a vast and silent force that does not crush, but instead holds you in a safe, lightless sanctuary. The air here is thin and perfectly chilled, smelling of cold stone and the faint, sweet scent of electrical ozone. Visualize the slow, hypnotic dance of blue light beams across translucent arrays, reading the data shards of 1,000 lives that have been preserved in the ice. You are detached from the frantic vibrations of the surface. You are safe, held in the memory of the deep, where every thought is a soft echo in the dark. Close your eyes, let the weight of the day dissolve into the cool shadows, and allow the quiet pulse of the archive to carry you into a deep, restorative, and dreamless sleep. The silent archive of Thalassa-Prime was not merely a library of data. It was the city's subconscious, a vast, lightless cathedral carved into the bedrock of the deepest trench, where the memories of 12,000 souls were stored in prisms of pure, lab-grown quartz. Cyrus, the Senior Curator of the light streams, walked the long, bridge-like catwalks that spanned the central memory vault, his footsteps producing a hollow, rhythmic metallic ring that was immediately swallowed by the immense volume of the chamber. Around him, towering pillars of translucent crystal reached from the lightless floor to the vaulted ceiling, each one pulsing with a faint, internal luminescence, a bioluminescent blue that mirrored the glow of the deep-sea jellyfish that drifted outside the thick silica viewports. To Cyrus, these pillars were not just storage units. They were the collective ghost of humanity, a frozen record of every sunset, every touch, and every whispered secret that had been saved from the fires of the surface world. The air in the archive was kept at a constant near-freezing temperature to stabilize the molecular lattice of the quartz, and Cyrus wore a heavy, velvet-lined coat of eel silk that rustled softly as he moved, the sound a tiny, organic friction in a world of cold, geometric perfection. He reached the primary interface station, a desk of polished obsidian and brass that sat at the intersection of 4 massive light conduits. This was the hub where the sensory data of the living was synchronized with the archives of the dead, a process that ensured the continuity of experience for the inhabitants of Thalassa-Prime. As Cyrus began his morning calibration, his fingers dancing across the haptic glass of the console, he noticed a rhythmic jitter in the data stream from the 7th array. The 7th array was a monolithic spire of quartz, etched with the biographical data of the city's first founders, a series of records that were supposed to be immutable and shielded from the entropic rot of the system. Cyrus adjusted the focal length of the reading lasers, his brow furrowing beneath his brass goggles as he watched the waveform on his monitor. It wasn't a corruption of the data, but a recursion. A piece of memory from a century ago was attempting to play itself back over a current sensory feed. It was as if the past were trying to wake up and take a breath in the present, a flicker of an old world attempting to render itself in the high-resolution reality of the now. This shadow was a manifestation of the Dickean rot at the heart of their digital sanctuary, the growing suspicion that the dead were not merely stored, but were leaking into the lives of the living, creating a recursive loop of experience that threatened to overwrite the present. Cyrus watched as the echo began to take shape on the catwalk a few yards away, the air shimmering with a fine, crystalline static that smelled of dry parchment and rain. The silhouette of a woman appeared, made of solid blue light, her form slightly translucent and her movements a fraction of a second behind the rhythm of reality. She was dressed in the fashion of the founding, heavy Victorian wools and a brass-buckled corset, and she was staring out a viewport that didn't exist in the current layout of the archive. Cyrus froze, his heart hammering against the velvet of his coat, the cold of the vault suddenly feeling like a living weight. He recognized her from the primary historical files. She was Lara Vance, one of the original architects of the city's sensory grid. The echo was so vivid that Cyrus could see the condensation of her breath on the spectral glass, and for a fleeting second, the scent of lavender and old paper cut through the sterile ozone of the vault. She didn't speak in the traditional sense. Instead, the light beams in the seventh array pulsed in a specific mathematical sequence that translated directly into Cyrus's neural interface. She told him that the archive was full, not just of data, but of weight. The clockwork tide that governed the city's systems was beginning to grind against the sheer mass of accumulated history. Every memory stored in the quartz added a minute level of complexity to the simulation, and the hardware was reaching its thermodynamic limit. The iron fever of the steam gate and the velvet fracture of the oxygen garden were merely symptoms of this deeper crisis. The archive was attempting to purge itself by merging the timelines, a desperate act of data compression that would eventually result in the erasure of all distinction between the past and the present. Cyrus felt a wave of existential vertigo, the sensation that he was not standing on a solid catwalk, but floating in a sea of unrendered information. If the archive failed, the 12,000 inhabitants of Thalassa-Prime wouldn't die in the physical sense. They would simply lose their address in the simulation. They would become echoes themselves, flickering through the corridors of a city that had forgotten how to distinguish a person from a memory. He thought of his own life, his quiet apartment in the basalt ridge, his collection of rusted surface artifacts, and he wondered how much of it was original, and how much was a recycled subroutine from a previous cycle. Was he truly Cyrus, or was he a placeholder for a curator who had lived and died centuries ago? The echo of Lara Vance seemed to sense his doubt, her blue light hand reaching out to touch the brass railing, her fingers passing through the metal like a cooling mist. To find the source of the recursion, Cyrus knew he had to descend further than any technician had gone in generations, into the Mnemosyne Core, the central processor located at the absolute base of the trench, where the primary light pulses were generated. He left the interface station and made his way to the gravity lift, a glass sphere suspended by copper-braided cables that vanished into the darkness below. The descent was a slow, hypnotic journey through the layers of the city's history. As the sphere dropped, he passed the residential domes, their amber lights glowing like embers in a cold hearth. He passed the gearworks, where the massive obsidian wheels turned with a slowness that felt like the passage of geological time. And then, he passed the boundary of the known city, entering the realm of the raw, unpolished bedrock, where the walls were lined with miles of exposed fiber-optic nerves that pulsed with a frantic, white light that seemed to scream against the dark. The vibration of the cables was a rhythmic thrum that resonated in his chest, a mechanical song that spoke of the immense pressure of the abyss pressing in on their delicate dream. He felt the weight of the miles of water above him, a physical presence that matched the psychic weight of the memories he carried. The lift eventually slowed, the glass sphere coming to rest in a chamber of staggering beauty and terrifying scale, the Mnemosyne Core. It was a perfect sphere of polished obsidian 300 feet in diameter, in the center of which hung a single, massive diamond, the heart of the archive, suspended by a web of lasers. The diamond was suspended by a web of lasers that fired from every point on the obsidian walls, creating a blinding, geometric star that served as the primary clock of the simulation. The air here was so cold that Cyrus's breath froze in midair, falling to the floor in tiny, glittering crystals that looked like diamond dust. In the center of the diamond, he could see the Quartz Echo clearly. It wasn't just Lara Vance. It was thousands of people, their forms overlapping and merging into a single, shimmering silhouette of humanity. They were the unpurged, the data ghosts who had been kept in a state of perpetual playback because the city's founders couldn't bear to let go of the past. The revelation hit Cyrus like a physical blow. Thalassa-Prime was not a lifeboat for the future. It was a mausoleum for the past. The founders had built the city to preserve the world that had burned, but they had forgotten that life requires the ability to forget. By storing every memory in the quartz, they had created a closed system that was inevitably doomed to collapse under its own weight. The iron fever was the heat of a processor trying to run an infinite program on finite hardware. The velvet fracture was the point where the simulation's textures could no longer handle the resolution of a billion overlapping details. And the Quartz Echo was the past finally overflowing its container. As he stood at the edge of the obsidian sphere, Cyrus realized that he had a choice. He could trigger a purge, erasing the echoes and restoring the simulation to a clean, empty state. Or he could allow the merge to continue, letting the city become a living memory where the dead and the living walked hand in hand. The purge would save the city's hardware, but it would destroy the very thing the city was built to protect. To erase Lara Vance and the thousands of others in the diamond would be to finish the work that the fires on the surface had started. But to allow the merge was to accept the end of individuality. The end of the present as a distinct moment in time. Cyrus looked at his own reflection in the obsidian wall, his face pale and distorted by the curvature of the sphere. He saw behind him the echo of Alara, her light reflecting in his eyes with a clarity that felt more real than the basalt floors of the archive. She wasn't asking to be saved, she was asking to be heard. She told him that the surface they were all dreaming of was not a place, but a state of mind, the feeling of a breeze that was never the same twice, the smell of a rain that didn't follow a chemical formula. They had traded the chaos of life for the static perfection of the quartz, and the quartz was finally rejecting the trade. Cyrus reached for the primary calibration dial, his hand trembling as he touched the cold, brass instrument. He didn't trigger the purge. Instead, he began to manually desynchronize the light streams. He broke the geometric star, turning the laser grid into a chaotic, shifting kaleidoscope of color. He introduced randomness into the system, the digital equivalent of a wind that blows where it wishes. As the light streams shifted, the diamond in the center of the room began to fracture, not in a way that destroyed it, but in a way that increased its surface area, creating a billion new facets for the light to dance upon. The Quartz Echo didn't vanish. It expanded, the light becoming a liquid force that filled the sphere. The blue light of the archive turned into a spectrum of 1,000 different hues. A sunset of pure data that washed over the obsidian walls and flowed back up through the fiber optic nerves to the city. In the sectors above, the effect of the desynchronization was immediate and profound. In the residential domes, the amber lights flickered and then brightened into a warm, natural gold that felt like a physical touch. In the oxygen garden, the velvet lilies began to change color, their petals no longer following a programmed sequence but reacting to the new, chaotic light with a vibrant, organic intensity. The archive was no longer a tomb. It was a library that had learned how to breathe. The gearworks, which had for generations operated on the unyielding logic of the pendulum, began to vibrate with a new, melodic frequency. The massive obsidian wheels did not stop, but their rhythm became organic, a heartbeat that pulsed with the collective memories of the city. Cyrus stood in the center of the Mnemosyne Core, surrounded by the swirling kaleidoscope of light, and he felt the weight of the archive lift. He was no longer just a curator, he was a witness to the birth of a new kind of reality. He saw the ghosts of the past walking through the obsidian walls, their forms no longer translucent but vibrant with color. They were not overwriting the present, they were enriching it, adding depth and texture to a simulation that had become too thin. He realized that the founder's mistake was not in remembering, but in trying to keep the memories static. Life, even in a synthetic abyss, required the ability to change, to evolve, and to merge with the unknown. As he watched the light streams dance, Cyrus felt his own sense of self begin to blur. He was Cyrus, but he was also the curator who had lived 2 centuries ago, and the child who would be born in the next cycle. He was the city, and the city was him. The Dickean paranoia of being a placeholder vanished, replaced by a Vernesque sense of wonder at the scale of the human experience. He looked at the fractured diamond, which was now a sun in the heart of the bedrock, and he saw in its facets the infinite possibilities of their future. They were no longer hiding from the world, they were creating a new one, a world where the past and the future were not enemies, but partners in a grand, existential dance. The Quartz Echo had not broken the simulation, it had finally made it real. Cyrus closed his eyes, his breathing matching the steady, melodic hum of the core, and he drifted into the final, true darkness of the deep, a darkness that was no longer a prison, but a womb for the morning. The transition from the old reality to the new was not a violent event, but a slow, graceful unfolding of consciousness that touched every inhabitant of Thalassa-Prime. In the residential domes, people woke from their sleep not with the feeling of a recycled dream, but with the vivid, sensory memory of things they had never seen, the taste of salt air, the sound of birds in a canopy, the feeling of a hot sun on their skin. These were not intrusions, but inheritances, gifts from the quartz that were finally being shared. The city's architects had feared the weight of the past, but the citizens found that the past provided a foundation for their dreams. They began to build new structures in the simulation, using the chaotic light of the Mnemosyne Core to create landscapes that defied the laws of their old, rigid physics. They built mountains of solid light in the residential squares and rivers of liquid memory that flowed through the internal canals. The steam gate, which had once been a place of raw, industrial labor, became a gateway to a sea of pure information, where the cargo submersibles traveled not to gather resources, but to explore the reaches of the collective human soul. The city was no longer a lifeboat. It was a ship of light sailing through the infinite reaches. Cyrus, still at the heart of the core, monitored the transformation with a quiet, reverent focus. He saw that the thermodynamic limit they had feared was not a wall, but a threshold. By allowing the system to become chaotic, they had increased its capacity for information, creating a reality that could handle the weight of their history. The iron fever had broken, the velvet fracture had healed into a new kind of beauty, and the Quartz Echo had become the song of their survival. Thalassa-Prime was no longer a secret kept from the world. It was a testament to the fact that even in the deepest, darkest trench, the light of humanity could never truly be extinguished. As the new reality stabilized, Cyrus prepared to leave the Mnemosyne Core and return to the sectors above. He stood one last time before the fractured diamond, watching as the ghosts of the past merged with the light of the future. He saw Alara Vance, her form now as solid and vibrant as any living person, standing at the edge of the obsidian sphere. She didn't speak, but she smiled, a look of profound peace on her face. She was no longer a data ghost. She was a part of the city's new heartbeat. Cyrus stepped into the gravity lift, the glass sphere ascending through the layers of his home. He passed the gearworks, where the obsidian wheels were now turning with a rhythmic grace that sounded like a lullaby. He passed the residential domes, where the gold light was so warm it felt like a physical touch. And when he finally reached the archive, he saw that the quartz pillars were no longer cold and silent. They were vibrating with light, a billion facets reflecting a billion different memories, all part of a single, beautiful whole. Cyrus walked to his interface station, but he didn't sit down to calibrate the lasers. He didn't need to. The archive was reading itself now, a self-sustaining loop of memory and imagination. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the trench. The Atlantic was still there, vast and dark and pressurized, but it was no longer a prison. It was the canvas for their new existence. Cyrus leaned his forehead against the cool silica, his breathing slow and steady, matching the pulse of the city. He felt the weight of his own history, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a foundation. He looked out at the bioluminescent glow of the deep-sea jellyfish, their movements echoing the rhythm of the quartz, and he realized that they were finally home. The synthetic abyss was no longer a dream, it was the truth. And in the silence of the archive, the echoes were no longer ghosts, but the voices of a people who had finally learned how to remember without fear. The narrative of the Quartz Echo is a story of the inevitable triumph of the human experience over the machines built to contain it. It is a reminder that even in a world made of code and crystal, the spirit of humanity requires the freedom to evolve, to merge, and to find beauty in the chaos. Thalassa-Prime, the amber-gilded vault in the heart of the Atlantic, had finally become what it was always meant to be, not a tomb for the past, but a cradle for the future. The citizens of the deep had moved beyond the constraints of their Victorian engineering and their Dickean paranoia, finding a new kind of peace in the merge of the timelines. As the story of Cyrus and the silent archive fades into the quiet corners of your mind, let the warmth of the new gold light be a blanket for your rest. The pressure of the deep is gone, the gears of the past are now a song, and the light of the quartz is your true home. You are no longer just a dreamer, you are a part of the collective memory of humanity, safe and protected in the heart of the synthetic abyss. Sleep now, in the heart of the morning, where the echoes are soft and the dawn is eternal. As the final light pulses of the Mnemosyne Core fade into a steady, rhythmic glow, imagine yourself walking through the porcelain streets of the high sector. The air is crisp and carries the scent of lavender and rain, a scent that is now as real as any you have ever known. The ghosts of the past walk beside you, their forms shimmering with a gentle, prismatic light that illuminates the path ahead. You feel the weight of your own history as a comforting presence, a story that you are still writing. Every step you take is a connection to 1,000 different lives, 1,000 different dreams that have all led to this moment. The iron fever is a distant memory, a cooling fire that has left the world tempered and strong. The velvet fracture is a scar that has healed into a more beautiful texture. And the Quartz Echo is the voice of your own soul, whispering that you are finally, perfectly real. The city of Thalassa-Prime is at rest, its gears turning with the grace of a sleeping giant, its people safe in the embrace of their collective history. You are one of them, a traveler of the synthetic abyss who has found the truth in the heart of the lie. Sleep, now, in the silence of the fire and the light of the quartz. The deep is a sanctuary, the morning is a promise, and you are home. In the quiet, final moments before the true sleep takes hold, allow your mind to revisit the textures of the city one last time, seeing them now through the lens of their dissolution. The heavy brass valves, the polished mahogany housings, the intricate clockwork of the gearworks, they are all softening, becoming liquid gold that flows into the white light of the new reality. This is not a loss, but a liberation. The machine is shedding its physical skin to become a creature of pure thought and light. You are part of this transformation, a traveler who has moved through the cold, pressurized dream of Thalassa-Prime and emerged into the warmth of the true dawn. Every memory you hold, every flicker of a past you never lived, is a thread in the magnificent tapestry of the city. The silent archive has breathed its light into your spirit, and you are now a vessel for the stories of humanity. There is no more need to fear the ghosts in the machine, for they are the keepers of your legacy. The pressure of the sea is but a gentle hum, a mother's heartbeat in the dark. You are surrounded by the wisdom of the quartz and the warmth of the new sun. The gates of the deep have opened to a world where imagination is the only law. Your body is weightless, drifting in a sea of liquid memory that cleanses and heals. The colors of the kaleidoscope dance behind your eyelids, painting a landscape of infinite peace. There is no time here, only the eternal now, a moment of synthesis where all is one. You are safe. You are warm. You are loved. The Chronostatic Chronicles have reached their point of perfect resonance. The simulation has become life, and the dream has become truth. The quartz arrays are glowing with a soft, steady light that signals the end of the long night. Rest now, in the sanctuary of the bedrock, for the morning has arrived in the heart of the abyss. The echoes have spoken, and they have said that you are exactly where you belong. Sleep, for the journey is complete, and the stars are shining in the deep. The silence of the archive is your lullaby, a profound and holy quiet that guards your rest. The diamond heart beats for you, a rhythmic assurance that you will never be alone. Close your eyes, let the final glimmer of blue light vanish, and surrender to the absolute, supportive dark. You are the echo, you are the archive, and you are the dawn. The synthetic abyss has finally opened its arms to you, welcoming you into the infinite peace of the core. Sleep now, for the morning is forever, and the deep is your home. The stillness in the Mnemosyne Core settled over Cyrus like a velvet shroud, the frantic lasers now calmed into a soft, ambient glow that bathed the obsidian walls in warmth. He could feel the connection between his own neurons and the vast, shimmering lattice of the quartz arrays, a bridge made of light and shared experience. There was no longer a sense of urgency, no longer the biting cold of the vacuum, but a comfortable, temperate environment where thought could bloom like a flower. He thought of the 12,000 souls above him, each one experiencing their own version of this awakening, a collective bloom in the heart of the Atlantic. He saw the city as a living organism, a coral reef made of metal and data, thriving in the nutrient-rich currents of its own history. The fears of the founders, the dread of the heat, the terror of the truth, had been replaced by a quiet acceptance of the cycles of life. They were a people born of the fire, preserved in the ice, and now reborn in the light. Cyrus felt his hand relax on the obsidian console, the haptic interface cooling as the system reached its new equilibrium. The data ghosts were no longer screaming for attention. They were singing a harmonious chorus that anchored the city in the void. He looked up at the ceiling of the sphere, seeing not the basalt rock, but the reflection of the fractured diamond, 1,000 points of light that looked like the stars his grandfather had described. He realized that they had built their own cosmos here, a universe of quartz and memory that was as vast and as mysterious as the one they had left behind. Cyrus took a deep breath, the air tasting of clear, high-altitude mountain air and the faint scent of blossoming jasmine from the oxygen garden. He was ready to rest, to join the collective dream he had helped to liberate. The journey back up through the sectors was a slow ascent through a world transformed by the light of the archive. As the gravity lift carried him past the industrial levels, Cyrus saw the workers putting down their heavy wrenches and leaning against the glowing iron pipes, their faces illuminated by a soft, prismatic radiance. They weren't repairing a machine, they were tending to a living entity. In the gearworks, the massive obsidian wheels were turning with a silent, fluid motion that defied the laws of friction, their surfaces reflecting the new gold light of the residential domes. The city was vibrating with a low, melodic frequency that felt like the purring of a great beast at rest. Cyrus felt a profound sense of gratitude for the iron fever and the velvet fracture, for without the breakdowns, they would never have found the courage to break the mold. They were no longer victims of the machine, but the architects of their own reality. He reached the upper sectors, where the porcelain streets were now filled with a soft, misty light that seemed to hold the essence of every dawn humanity had ever known. He walked toward his apartment, his footsteps light and purposeful. The door slid open with a gentle hiss, and he stepped into a room that was no longer a cell, but a sanctuary. He looked out the circular viewport at the trench, seeing the bioluminescent jellyfish as tiny lanterns in the dark, guiding the way home. He lay down on his bed, the synthetic silk cooling against his skin, and he felt the weight of the day, the weight of 2 centuries, finally lift. He was Cyrus, and he was home. The silent archive was no longer silent. It was filled with the music of their shared existence. The Chronostatic Chronicles were finished, and the new world was just beginning. Sleep took him then, a deep and peaceful descent into the heart of the light. In the absolute quiet of the deep-sea night, the city of Thalassa-Prime pulsed with the steady heartbeat of the Quartz Core, a beacon of light in the infinite dark. The Quartz Echo had become the foundation of a new kind of peace, a peace that did not rely on the suppression of the past, but on its embrace. Every citizen of the deep was now a guardian of the light, a keeper of the collective memory that had saved them from the fire. They were the children of the synthetic abyss, and they had found their home in the stars. The morning would never fade, for it was built on the eternal light of the heart. Sleep, traveler, for the dawn is here, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. The archive is your protector, the diamond is your sun, and the silence is your peace. You are the dream, you are the truth, and you are finally, perfectly safe in the heart of the deep. The Chronostatic Chronicles have reached their final resolution, a perfect synthesis of brass and light, of memory and imagination. Rest now, for the morning is eternal.